Lola Remedios walked slowly through the narrow streets of General Santos City, her worn sandals dragging against the hot asphalt of the Philippines. At 78 years old, each step was a struggle against time and against the pain that spread through her frail body. The tropical sun punished her wrinkled skin as she carried a plastic bag with some cheap vegetables she had managed to buy at the local market. Her trembling hands firmly gripped the few pesos remaining in her worn wallet, mentally calculating whether it would be enough for the medicine she desperately needed. The small wooden house where she had lived since retirement seemed to shrink with each passing day. The peeling walls and ceiling that leaked during tropical rains told the story of decades of hard work and total dedication to others. Remedios had spent her entire life caring for children from families who could barely afford to pay for her services, but she never complained. Her maternal nature and generous heart made her beloved throughout the neighborhood, where she was known simply as Lola Remedios, everyone's grandmother. On that suffocating afternoon, she sat in her worn rocking chair, watching the neighborhood children play in the dirt street. Her tired eyes filled with tears as she remembered times when she had the energy to run after the little ones, prepare nutritious meals, and tell bedtime stories. Now, she could barely prepare a simple meal for herself. The medical diagnosis echoed in her mind like a persistent echo: advanced diabetes and heart problems that required expensive and constant treatment. Remedios' pension was so small it barely covered her basic needs. Each month, she had to choose between buying food or medication, a cruel decision no elderly person should face. Her children, scattered across different islands of the Philippines, struggled with their own financial difficulties and couldn't offer much more than prayers and occasional visits filled with guilt. Loneliness weighed on her shoulders like a wet blanket, especially during the long nights when pain prevented her from sleeping. As she rocked gently in her chair, Remedios closed her eyes and allowed her mind to wander to happier times. Times when her hands were still steady and her heart overflowed with hope. Times when she cared for a special boy she lovingly called Anak, my son, a boy who grew to become something she never could have imagined possible. A boy whose name was now known throughout the world, but who would always be just little Emmanuel to her, the one she held during tropical storms. The 1980s seemed like an eternity ago when Remedios closed her eyes and transported herself to the small Pacquiao family house in Quibor, Bukidnon. She was only 35 at the time, a young widow determined to support her own children through domestic work. The Pacquiao family didn't have much money, but Dionysia, Emmanuel's mother, desperately needed someone reliable to care for her children while she worked long hours to keep the family together. Remedios accepted the job not just for the modest pay, but because she saw something special in little Emmanuel's bright eyes. Emmanuel was only 6 years old when Remedios began caring for him, but he already showed signs of the fierce determination that would make him world famous. He was too thin, often hungry, but his eyes burned with uncontrollable energy. Remedios vividly remembered how he used a shadow box in the backyard, his small fists cutting through the hot air while she watched from the kitchen window, preparing the rice that would be the only substantial meal of the day. She always saved a little extra for him, even when it meant she would eat less. During the long tropical afternoons, when the heat made any activity almost impossible, Remedios would sit Emmanuel on her lap and tell stories about Filipino heroes who overcame great adversities. She spoke about Jose Rizal, Lapu-Lapu, and other warriors who fought for their people, planting seeds of courage and determination in the boy's heart. Emmanuel listened to every word with religious attention, his small eyes shining with dreams that seemed too big for his humble reality. Remedios always ended these sessions saying that he too would be special one day, that God had great plans for him. Remedios' most precious memories were of the nights when Emmanuel had nightmares or fell ill. She would rock him in her arms, singing old Tagalog lullabies while his fever subsided. During a particularly severe dengue fever that nearly took the boy's life, Remedios spent 3 nights awake, applying cold compresses and praying fervently to every saint she knew. When Emmanuel finally opened his eyes and smiled weakly at her, Remedios knew she had found her life's purpose: to protect and nurture this special child that fate had placed in her path. When the Pacquiao family moved to General Santos City in search of better opportunities, Remedios had to make the most difficult decision of her life. Her own children needed her, and she couldn't accompany the family to the new city. The farewell was devastating for both sides. Emmanuel, then 12 years old, cried profusely when Remedios explained that she couldn't go with them. She promised that she would always be in his thoughts and prayers, that she would always be his second mother. Years later, she could still feel the desperate grip of the boy's thin arms around her neck, and the words whispered in her ear, "Salamat, Lola. Mahal Kida. Thank you, Grandma. I love you." 25 years had passed since Remedios said goodbye to little Emmanuel, and life had taken its cruel toll on her aging body. The diabetes that began as a minor inconvenience had gradually transformed into a debilitating condition that affected every aspect of her daily existence. Her legs frequently tingled and lost sensation, forcing her to lean against walls as she walked through the house. Wounds on her feet healed slowly, and she lived in constant fear of infections that could lead to amputation, a fate she had witnessed before many of her elderly neighbors. The medical consultation from the previous week had brought even darker news. Dr. Rivera, a young doctor at the local health center, had gently explained that her heart problems were rapidly worsening. Her blood pressure was dangerously high, and the medications needed to control it cost more than her entire monthly pension. Remedios had listened to the doctor's words as if she were in a distant dream. Dialysis, heart surgery, intensive care, all things that existed in a financial world far beyond her reach. Her neighbors, kind people who faced their own daily struggles, had tried to organize a small collection to help with medical costs. Aling Rosa, who lived in the house next door, had gone door to door in the barangay, explaining Remedios' situation with tears in her eyes. They managed to raise a few thousand pesos, a touching sum that demonstrated the community's love, but which was only a fraction of what would be needed for proper treatment. Remedios kept the money in an old can under her bed, knowing it would be enough for perhaps 1 month of basic medications. Nights had become the most difficult time for Remedios. The pain in her joints intensified with the tropical humidity, and she often stayed awake until the early hours, staring at the humidity-stained ceiling and wondering if it was worth continuing to fight. Her prayers had become more frequent and more desperate, not asking for miracles, but simply for strength to face another day. She wondered if her former children, the kids she had raised over the years, still remembered her, if any of them knew she was suffering in silence. During one of those sleepless nights, Remedios dragged herself to a dusty cardboard box at the back of her closet. Her trembling hands searched through old photographs, yellowed letters, and small gifts she had received over the years. At the bottom of the box, she found a faded photo of Emmanuel at 8 years old, smiling shyly at the camera while she embraced him. On the back of the photo, in her own young handwriting, she had written, "My little champion, 1987. She held the photo against her chest and allowed the tears to flow freely, remembering days when believing in miracles seemed natural and hope was as abundant as tropical rain. Aling Rosa couldn't sleep after seeing Remedios collapsing in her backyard that Tuesday morning. The image of the elderly woman falling gently like a dry leaf while watering her plants continued to haunt her thoughts. After helping to take Remedios to the health center and hearing the doctor speak about the severity of her condition, Rosa knew she needed to do something more than just organize neighborhood collections. While preparing dinner for her family, an idea began to form in her mind, an idea that seemed impossible, but worth trying. Rosa clearly remembered the stories that Remedios told about her years caring for different families. She always spoke with special fondness about a boy named Emmanuel, whom she had raised in Bukidnon and General Santos City. Over the years, Rosa had heard these stories so many times that she could visualize the thin boy who used to train boxing in the backyard, while Remedios watched him with maternal pride. But it was only recently, when she saw a television report about Manny Pacquiao visiting his hometown, that Rosa made the connection that would change everything. The next morning, Rosa took a jeepney to the city center, determined to find out if her suspicion was correct. She visited the local newspaper office, where she knew a reporter named June de la Cruz, who had grown up in the same neighborhood. With her heart beating rapidly, she explained her theory to June. The elderly woman who was dying of diabetes and heart problems could be the same Lola Remedios, who had cared for the future world champion during his difficult childhood. June was initially skeptical, but when Rosa showed him the faded photograph she had convinced Remedios to lend, his eyes widened with recognition. June had covered several of Manny Pacquiao's visits to the Philippines, and knew that the champion often spoke about people who had helped him during his childhood. In a 2019 interview, Pacquiao had specifically mentioned a nanny who had been like a second mother to him, someone who had loved him unconditionally during his most vulnerable years. June began making frantic calls, contacting journalist colleagues in Manila who had connections with Pacquiao's team. The story of a humble woman who had raised a future world champion and now desperately needed help was exactly the kind of narrative that could touch anyone's heart. Within 48 hours, the story had reached the ears of Jean Pacquiao through a chain of contacts that included sports journalists, social workers, and community activists. When Jean saw the photograph of Remedios holding a young Manny, she immediately knew they had found the woman her husband had been searching for years. Manny was training in Los Angeles at the time, preparing for a charity exhibition, when he received the call that would change the course of 2 lives forever. On the other side of the Pacific, an elderly woman continued her silent struggle against illness, unaware that her story of love and sacrifice was about to return to her in a way she never could have imagined. Manny Pacquiao was finishing his morning training session at his private gym in Los Angeles when his phone rang. Sweat was still dripping down his face as he removed his boxing gloves, preparing for another day filled with commitments and responsibilities. When he saw Jinky's name appear on the screen, he automatically smiled. His wife rarely called during his training unless it was something important. But when he heard her voice, heavy with emotion and urgency, Manny immediately knew this wasn't a routine call. Jinky's words fell upon him like a sequence of unexpected punches. Lola Remedios, severe diabetes, heart problems, no money for treatment. Manny sat heavily on a gym bench, his mind racing back through the decades to the small house in Bukidnon where a gentle woman had become his guardian angel. He could perfectly visualize Remedios' caring face, her hands always busy taking care of him and his siblings, her soft voice singing lullabies during difficult nights when hunger made sleep impossible. Tears began to roll down the world champion's face as he remembered how Remedios always found a way to make him feel special, even when they had almost nothing. She had been the first person to truly believe in his boxing dreams, the first to say he would be great one day. When other adults laughed at his fantasies of becoming a champion, Remedios encouraged him to keep training, always finding small ways to support his impossible dreams. She had sold her own simple jewelry to buy his first proper boxing gloves, a sacrifice he had never forgotten. Without hesitation, Manny cancelled all his commitments for the next 3 days. He called his personal assistant and instructed them to prepare a private flight to the Philippines immediately. It wasn't just about money, although he could easily pay for any medical treatment Remedios needed. It was about honoring a debt of love that had been cultivated for decades of gratitude. It was about ensuring that the woman who had planted the seeds of his greatness received the care and respect she deserved in her golden years. As his private jet cut through the clouds toward the Philippines, Manny closed his eyes and allowed the memories to flood him completely. He remembered the time Remedios had worked double shifts to get extra money for his supplements when he was training more intensely. She had stayed awake for nights when he had pneumonia, applying compresses and praying for his recovery. Most importantly, she had been the only person who never doubted that a poor boy from a broken family could conquer the world through boxing. Now it was his turn to be her guardian angel, to prove that all the faith she had placed in him had not been in vain. Remedios was resting in her rocking chair when she heard an unusual commotion on the street. Expensive cars rarely appeared in her humble neighborhood, and the sound of multiple vehicles stopping in front of her house made her slowly get up to investigate. Her vision was blurred due to medication, but she could make out several figures approaching her door. Her heart began to beat faster, not from fear, but from a strange anticipation she couldn't explain. The first person she recognized was Aling Rosa, who was walking toward her house with tears streaming down her face and a radiant smile. Behind her came a man who seemed vaguely familiar, but Remedios' mind was too confused to fully process what she was seeing. It was only when he approached and she saw those eyes, the same determined and gentle eyes she had watched for so many years, that the realization hit her like lightning. Her legs became weak, and she had to lean against the doorframe to keep from falling. Emmanuel, her little Emmanuel, was standing in her yard, now a grown man, successful beyond her wildest dreams, but with the same loving expression she remembered from when he was a child. Manny approached slowly, respectfully, as if he were approaching royalty. When he was just a few meters away, he knelt in the dusty earth in front of her house, not caring about his expensive clothes, and extended his hands toward her. Both their eyes were filled with tears, decades of separation and love being bridged in a single electrifying moment. Remedios slowly descended the steps of her house, her trembling hands reaching for the face of the man who would always be her child in her heart. She touched his cheeks, confirming he was real, that this wasn't one of the vivid dreams that diabetes sometimes gave her. Manny covered her hands with his own, hands that had won world titles, but which now trembled with pure emotion. Neighbors began to gather, whispering in amazement, but for Remedios and Manny, the world had shrunk to include only the two of them and the unchanged love that had withstood the test of time and distance. Without a word, Manny enveloped her in his arms, carefully, as if she were made of precious porcelain. Remedios felt all the pain and worry of the last months melting away in his embrace. She had spent so many nights wondering if she would die alone and forgotten. But here was living proof that the love she had given during those formative years had taken deep root. Her little champion had remembered her, had come back to her, and for a moment, all her pain seemed insignificant compared to the overwhelming joy that filled her fragile heart. In the hours that followed the emotional reunion, Manny worked with the efficiency of a military general organizing a campaign. He had brought with him a team of specialist doctors from Manila, including a renowned endocrinologist and a cardiologist who had treated other elite athletes. While Remedios rested in her bed, overwhelmed by emotion and still processing the reality of the situation, the doctors began a complete evaluation of her condition, using state-of-the-art portable equipment that Manny had specifically requested for this visit. Dr. Santos, the lead cardiologist on the team, worked silently while conducting a series of tests. His years of experience had taught him that cases like Remedios required not just immediate medical intervention, but a complete restructuring of the patient's healthcare environment. After 2 hours of thorough examination, he met with Manny privately to discuss his findings. The situation was serious, but far from hopeless. With the right treatment and constant monitoring, Remedios could have many more years of quality life. While the doctors worked, Manny took the time to truly absorb the conditions in which Remedios was living. He walked through the tiny house, noticing the cracked walls, the leaking roof, and the complete lack of modern conveniences that would make life easier for someone in her condition. His heart broke as he realized that the woman who had sacrificed so much for his well-being was living in conditions that were barely adequate for anyone, much less someone gravely ill. By afternoon, Manny had made a series of decisions that would immediately and permanently transform Remedios' situation. He called his construction team in General Santos City and instructed them to be mobilized to begin work immediately on a new house that would be constructed in the same neighborhood, a house specially designed to accommodate the medical needs of an elderly diabetic patient. The house would be equipped with a full medical monitoring system, an emergency call system, and would be wheelchair accessible throughout. More importantly, Manny arranged for Remedios to be transferred immediately to a private medical facility in Manila, where she could receive the comprehensive treatment she needed. He hired a private air ambulance and a team of nurses specializing in geriatric care to accompany her during the transfer. As she prepared for the journey, Remedios looked into the eyes of her beloved child and saw not just the successful man he had become, but the same caring spirit that had always existed within him. She realized that while she had helped shape the young boy he once was, he had carried forward all the lessons of love and compassion she had taught him, multiplying them in ways she never could have imagined. 6 months later, Remedios was sitting in her new living room, watching the neighborhood children play in her yard through a window that offered a perfect view of the park that Manny had ordered built in front of her house. Her diabetes was now under complete control thanks to state-of-the-art medication regimens and 24-hour monitoring provided by the private medical team that Manny had permanently assigned to her care. Her heart problems, although still requiring careful management, had stabilized dramatically after the successful surgery she had received in Manila. The transformation in her life had been so complete that sometimes she still struggled to believe it was real. The new house that Manny had built for her wasn't just modern and comfortable. It was a testament to the thoughtfulness and attention to detail that characterized everything he approached. Each room had been designed with her specific needs in mind, from the walk-in shower that eliminated any risk of falling, to a specially designed kitchen where she could prepare meals without straining herself. More importantly, the house included a small clinic where visiting doctors could treat not just her, but other elderly residents of the neighborhood who needed medical care. The impact of Manny's generosity had rippled through the entire community in ways that even he hadn't anticipated. Inspired by his example of honoring someone who had cared for him during his formative years, other successful individuals from the neighborhood began reaching out to their own former caregivers and teachers. A wave of recognition and gratitude swept through General Santos City, with business leaders, politicians, and professionals all suddenly remembering people who had helped them during their journeys to success. The national media had covered the story extensively, but Manny always insisted that the focus should remain on Remedios and on the broader message about honoring our elders and those who sacrifice for others. During interviews, he consistently emphasized that his success would never have been possible without the foundation of love and care that people like Remedios had provided during his childhood. He established a formal foundation dedicated to providing medical care for elderly former domestic workers throughout the Philippines, ensuring that Remedios' story would serve as a catalyst for systemic change. As the sun set over General Santos City on this particular evening, Remedios reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her from the brink of despair to this moment of contentment and security. She realized that the lesson of her life wasn't just about being saved by someone she had once cared for. It was about the enduring power of genuine love and sacrifice to create cycles of generosity that continue for generations. The little boy she had nurtured with so much tenderness had grown not just into a world champion, but into a man who understood that true greatness lies in lifting others up. As she said her evening prayers, Remedios thanked God not just for her restored health and security, but for being able to witness firsthand that love, when genuinely given, never truly disappears. It just transforms and multiplies, eventually returning to us in ways more beautiful than we ever could have imagined. If you like this kind of story, leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next videos.